All right, awesome. So we'll go ahead and kick off here, I suppose. So if you're just joining, I've got a neighbor's dog that's kind of going ballistic, so sorry if that's a little bit in the background there. This is hybrid content types, marrying external APIs and local Drupal content. Just a little bit of background. Me, I'm Dan. I'm the Associate Director of Development at a firm called ID5, based out of Baltimore. Drupal's been my main gig for probably 8-ish years or so, along with some JavaScript and just regular PHP and things like that. ID5 is basically works on all kinds of projects, mainly higher ed and nonprofit. And if any front-end developers are out there, we are actually looking actively for front-end developers. So give me a shout if you're for some reason looking for work. Next up, I figure I'd just give you kind of an overview of the concept here, just so you can see if this is indeed interesting to you. So hybrid content types are essentially a content type in Drupal that has an external single source of truth that is API-based. So what that means is that you have duplicate content that is the source of truth somewhere else, but you need it in Drupal for several reasons, right? So what we do is mirror the external content locally in Drupal, as well as usually add local fields so that you can do things like taxonomy references, entity references, add media, whatever you need to do locally, right? And then normally what we do is have it load more details directly from the API upon full view, or really any view you want, but normally it's on kind of a full view, right? So that's kind of just the high level gist of it there. If that doesn't sound like something you're interested in, there's the other talk that's going on right now, so feel free to pop into that. We are going to look at some code examples. I've got some general examples as well as some examples kind of in a project that's going on right now, so we can kind of dive through that as deep as people are interested in. But since it's the nature of this is really sort of like custom based on an API, we're just going to kind of generalize some examples and walk through sort of a general overview. I shared a link in the chat, which has sort of a cheat sheet that I came up with that we actually use at ID5 for some of our junior developers to follow sometimes. Of just kind of a general overview of hybrid content types, as well as some code snippets that you can use in local projects and things like that. So feel free to utilize that or copy it or whatever you want to do if that kind of stuff interests you. And I guess the final thing to say is really that, this is like one way of doing it. There are probably, several others that I can think of off the top of my head. We've found this to be sort of a simple one. So we're kind of focusing on that, but happy to answer any questions on how to do it differently or whatever else to the best of my knowledge, if folks are interested. Let's see. Okay, so the first question I always ask myself is, given that sort of generalized overview that you know now, like when do you want to choose to use a hybrid content type? Because it's not every time. It's pretty specialized, right? So number one, you would choose to do this when there is an established API for the information that you want, right? And information could be anything. It could be, books. It could be people. It could be whatever kind of content you're trying to create. You can do it by this method. It doesn't really matter, right? But what you do need is an API endpoint, because you're going to rely on that to load details and things like that that aren't stored in Drupal in your chosen view. The second point is this really shines when there's lots of complex content that you don't necessarily want to like feed into Drupal and track and deal with it, right? So, for instance, think of like if your content type was like books or something, right? And you had, each book had an author that had, 50 other books that had to load on view or something like that. But you don't necessarily need that information in Drupal or want to track it every time they update a book or add another one or whatever. You can basically just get that information in real time on the fly on the detail view. And that's kind of like where this shines. It also really shines when you need to actually physically hybridize the content, right? So you need additional local content or context with that content, right? So in the books instance, like if you needed to relate it to other books that wasn't in the API, or relate it to news stories that was also on that's not coming from the API, or things like that. Mainly, it's usually we see things like entity references, vocabulary references, taxonomy terms. Those types of things are normally 99% of what we see, in that we want to take this information and somehow relate it to something else that actually is in the site, right? So this really shines there because it allows you to pull in some content, but not everything, and just kind of relate it as you need, but then just sort of load details on the fly, right? So along with that, I always like to think of when it's not a good idea to do something, right? And there's obviously lots more than this on pros and cons, but when it's not a good idea, or maybe when you should rethink your approach, I would say, obviously, if there's no API for your information, you're not going to be able to do API calls on the fly anywhere, right? So not only is it not an option, you just can't really do it. Unless you're going to make sort of a separate DB call or come up with your own API somehow. Technically would kind of be a hybrid content type, but it's a little bit more advanced than, I like to think about really for this example. So, or another bad idea to try it would be when most or all content needs to be possibly editable in Drupal, right? If you need to do that, then there's no real reason you need to go to the single source of truth, right? Because then Drupal becomes your single source of truth, and you just kind of import content occasionally via feeds or whatever, and then override it locally, right? So a little bit different thing. When the content is not large or complex, if you need a hybrid content type, and you're talking about 3 to 4 fields, of uncomplicated content for each node, then don't even bother with the hybrid content type. Just pull it all in when you do your import, right? And just override it every time. You'll spend more time and effort trying to get it with more potential pitfalls than it would be worth, right? Just like pull them all in at feeds when you create it and call it a day. And lastly, really, if the whole idea of hybrid content is that something needs to happen locally, right? Like you need to relate it to a taxonomy, you need to relate it to whatever, right? Choose the author, etc. If you don't need to do any of that, then there's no real point in pulling it into Drupal, right? There are better ways. Go directly to the API, make some sort of JS like Nvtc app, whatever you want to do, right? But just go directly to the API and don't pull it into Drupal at all, right? So those are kind of some common pitfalls that we see. Obviously, there are several more, but just some things to think about, really. All right. So I thought I'd go next into kind of like an example request to show. I think it'll give kind of a pretty good overview of what I'm talking about here, and then we'll go kind of in depth of how we solved it, and then sort of look through some code and some configuration of like that particular example. And so this example is actually one we at Untitled are working on right now. It's in dev. It's a pretty simple request, so it just seemed like a good fit for this, actually. So what we have is a client that has an existing API endpoint for 100+ faculty members. This is a science-based university program, so all the faculty are kind of scientists. And I don't know if there's any scientists out there, but it seems like, in the audience here, but it seems like every time we deal with scientists as people and information on websites, they always care about publications. I guess publications are kind of the lifeblood of science faculty and things like that. So they always have a lot of them, and it's always very important to them to have it, right? So in this instance, each one of these 100 plus faculty could have 60 to 100 publications, so that could come in any different form. But we just like to standardize and display. So the importance here is that once you start looking at those numbers, right, like 100 plus faculty, 60 to 100 publications each, that's a lot of things to try and pull into Drupal and keep straight if we don't need to, right? So in this instance, we're going to say we don't need to, and we'll just get it on the fly, right? There's also some other content in there that we don't need in Drupal, bios, different projects that we've worked on, a whole bunch of other stuff that you'll see when I show the example. But the gist of it is that we didn't need all this stuff. We basically just need people in, right? And we need people in because they want to tag those people to certain news articles, certain different things that university is doing for instruments and missions. It's kind of like a space program. So they have different missions that they want to tag faculty to and things like that, right? So that's kind of the overview. And how we implemented this, I'm going to run through these real quick, but we're going to go basically a little bit more in depth on each one of these. So don't fret if this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you right now. I'm just trying to give kind of an overview of what this looks like, right? So how we solve this is we create a content type in Drupal, in this instance, faculty member, right? Just like you would a normal content type. Then basically, you'll add some fields to it, which we'll get into in depth later, via something like feeds, which we used in this example. We're going to pull in stuff from their API for every faculty member, right? We're going to loop through and say, okay, every faculty member that's in this API endpoint, give me the ID, the image, the name, department, and bio or whatever, right? So we're storing, let's call it 1, 2, 3, like 5 fields in Drupal of tracked content, basically, that mimics the source of truth, right? And we set feeds to override these fields whenever the importer runs, so that even if some wily admin somewhere managed to change something, then it would always go back to that single source of truth, right? Because that's what we want. We want the API to be that source of truth, and the only things that are local sources of truth are things like entity references, right? We add the local fields for any entity reference we want. In this case, we're categorizing and relating them to like news articles and missions and things like that, which you'll see in a sec. We used views to make a filterable view of all faculty using all the local available fields. And then we load everything else on profile view. And what that winds up looking like is something like this. So this is pretty bare bones at the moment because we're waiting on a few things, but essentially you can see it's just like a list of faculty that are in the system, right? And so this is basically, well, not basically, it's a stock view. It's a Drupal view. It's got some filters that'll be added to it, whatever. Easy peasy, right? Out of the box, Drupal. All of these fields are local, okay? Image, name, which is just the node title, and title, right? So per our designs and stuff, this is all the fields we really needed to show, in a view or in a list view. So that's all we really needed in the system, because I think the important thing to remember, and we'll go into this a little bit later, but like you want to pull in as many things as little locally as you need, but it's as much as you need to do things like stock views, right? Because all this content has to be local in order for you to just go in and make a quick view and for it to show, right? But then, this is mainly our local content. If we look at an individual bio, right, we'll see that there's a lot of information here. And just to give you a preview, like we see that there's a lot of information there, but if we actually look at the person, we're looking at a couple fields here, right? So these are all the ones that we're tracking in the mirroring from the API, And then we've got some local fields here, which are basically just entity references or taxonomy references to local content, right? And if we go back and view that, we'll see that we're actually loading a whole heck of a lot more every time we do, right? So we've got image, which is local, no title, which is local, title, which is local, right? But like all this information here, contact info, educational background, bio in this instance, that's all coming directly from the API on page load. Well, I mean, it's cached and stuff, obviously, but it's going directly from the API, right? Like we're not saving it locally at all. Then we move down to some local stuff, right? Expertise, missions, instruments. This is all kind of entity references and taxonomy references to local stuff, right? Then we move back to external again, awards, and then down to publications, right? And then all this stuff is not local. It's just coming directly from the API as we view full content, right? So, yeah, so I mean, it's just kind of goes to show you like how these steps, while they may not make sense to everybody, like once you get them, it kind of makes sense and is straightforward, and you can do stuff like this rather easily of, having a little bit of content locally, right? But then loading a lot more on, in this case, it's like a full node view, but you could apply that to anything. If you needed it in a weird teaser somewhere or whatever, you could load stuff there too, so yeah. So that's kind of like how that ended up looking, right? So we'll look a little bit more in depth at each step now, and I'm going to switch off to like code in some other places and some config, so we can just kind of like walk through at a high level kind of what that looks like for this particular implementation. And so first off, we're going to create a shell content type and add fields for minimum viable tracked content is my term for it. Just what I came up with to keep it straight in my mind. And these first two are basically kind of the same step. It just makes sense to break them out slightly for the display here today. And we'll come back to minimum viable track content and what that kind of looks like. But then we're going to ingest that NVTC into Drupal. We're going to get and display API content on full entity view in this case. And then, yeah, everybody's favorite, just profit, So we'll run through this. So the shell content type basically is a regular content type in Drupal. Like if we just look at one here, it's nothing special, right? Person, we actually have the machine name of APL faculty just because I like to prefix stuff in an odd way sometimes but regardless, the thing to think about with the content type is really more not the content type itself, but like who should be using it as far as roles, and begin to kind of game plan that. Because we are pulling in content from a source of truth, as well as having local content, you have to start thinking about if you're going to need things like field level permissions and things of that nature, right? Because while we can set things like feeds to override that content when cron runs or however often you're pulling in your content, you don't want people to change that stuff, right? So a lot of times what we do is kind of put it into a field set, and I'll show you that in a second. But basically, the gist of this slide is create your content type and start thinking about who and how they're going to access it, and if you need to control that, If it's like just one admin, super admin kind of a person that's doing the entire site, probably doesn't matter. Like they're going to be doing this themselves and know what it is, right? If you, have a lot of content contributors in there, things like that, you're really going to want to try and lock down access to this quite a bit. And if you need things like multiple content contributors to go in and, edit and tag things, then you've obviously got to go down. I think I see a question there on fields read-only with a form alter is a good idea. Yeah, totally. You can totally do that. We've done that in the past. Basically, just do a hook form alter and make them read-only or hide them for certain roles or whatever you want to do. But, it's a little extra work there. But if your use case requires it, then totally worth it. Even field level permissions, I think the contributed module works well. So there's varying levels of options out there for you. And then so moving on, next is basically kind of wrapped into it, is adding fields for the minimum viable track content and any needed local fields. So the tricky part sometimes is figuring out what exactly is minimum viable track content. And so my answer is as little as possible that still lets everything run right. So what I like to do is look at where this content is used throughout the site, whether that's in the wires or, design or just functionality specs, right? What fields am I seeing there, right? Because it's easiest if I can have all of those fields locally, right? Because then I can just not worry about the API calls every time those are loaded. In this instance, it would be this right here, right? So like it's name, title, image, okay? A lot of times that would have like truncated bio or whatever. In this case, it just didn't, right? But so I would look throughout the different places your content appears in the site and figure out what fields you need from the API, right? And that will become your minimum viable track content because you want to pull all of that locally if possible, because then you don't have to load the API every time a teaser runs, which would be a performance hit that you don't want to take. You know what I mean? So look across the site, see what fields are being used, start with that as your Nvtc. We also get the question a lot of, hey, if I'm only bringing in these 4 fields, like what happens with search and what happens, stuff like that. So that is also a little bit more complex question. The way we get around it a lot is, there's rarely a site we put out these days that doesn't use Search API for more robust internal searching. And you can set that index to be on rendered content of a full node view or something like that. That would, load that node view and full content, including API content, and be searchable, right? So you just have to get a little bit tricky around that. Like a stock Drupal search is not going to then look at someone's publications or look at someone's bio. And honestly, you probably wouldn't want 100+ publications in a search index anyway, but you get what I'm saying, right? So you got to get a little bit more tricky maybe if you need a more robust kind of internal search and things like that. But there are ways around it rather than adding all the fields, is basically what I'm saying. And then so the other important thing is to figure out what kind of unique ID for each piece of content you're going to need, right? Because obviously this whole approach hinges on going to an API endpoint and getting data for, in this case, a person, right? So you need to track whatever that ID is for your particular API on the person, right? Because we're going to load that. So in this instance, what that looks like is, I don't know if that's big enough that you can see it there, but this is our all people endpoint, right? Where we're going and creating stuff. It gives us an ID of, for Robert Allen here, of 168, right? If I was to go here, I can then pass it that ID, and I just get Robert Allen stuff, right? So like that's the key concept there, is using that UUID to then load stuff on whatever view you want, right? So it could be numerical, it could be a hash string, it could be a whole different endpoint or something, depending on what your API is, but you'll need to store whatever that is locally. So like if we look at this person here, we'll see in our, as I was saying, you'll see like kind of, I like to just throw all that in kind of a details or a field set, so then I can, hide that, or it's just easier to know what track content is versus not track content, if that makes sense. So you see all the fields we're storing here for Kathleen Mant, right? Name, first name, last name, And that's really for sorting and things like that on the views, quite honestly, of like sort by last name, sort by first name, things like that. Title, in this instance, we're just saving a image string that's going to go to a their external endpoint of where these images are, etc. But then down here, you'll see we're holding the ID, right? And then so we'll use this ID to go get information every time it shows. And the thing to remember is that with the hybrid content types, there are those two sources of information, right? There's local content, which is the MVTC, and full content, which is API-based. Like API-based full content can be as long or as big as you want. The local content is what you want to keep to as small as possible. Hence the word minimum, minimum viable, right there in the beginning, right? And that's for a couple of reasons, but mainly because you don't want to track as much in two different places, right? Like track as little as possible over here that has to be duplicated, and just go to the API for the rest. All right. So from there, we're going to ingest Nvtc into Drupal, right? And in a nutshell, again, there's lots of ways to do it, but you're going to hit an API endpoint, get that data, and create nodes from it, right? So we like to use the feeds module, even though it's still in alpha or beta, I can't recall, for D8, but it's pretty stable, and we've used it quite a bit on production stuff. It makes stuff like this rather easy. You can extend the parsers, or you can extend the fetchers. All of that stuff you can extend if you need to for your particular API, and it doesn't require recreating the wheel every time. So obviously you can write full-on custom code to do any of this stuff, but feeds is already there and a good starting point, so we choose to use it. If we look at, sorry, where'd I go with our API endpoint again. So in this instance, we have one endpoint that's going to bring back all our people, which can be time consuming if you're looking at a couple hundred people, but it's nice that we don't have to go through pagination and things like that. If you have pagination, you'll obviously have to like write some custom code or kind of extend a parser or fetcher to do that, and basically get all your information, right? But the nice part about this one is that it's already giving us minimal information here, right? But it's all we need. So we'll get the first name, last name, display name, doing some research areas, and a title, right? Like physicist. And then this is like the image name, right? So already pretty minimal. We're going to basically loop through all that via feeds and just create nodes that just have this information, right? So if we look at a basic feed here, right? This is APL faculty feed, blah, blah, blah. Go to mapping. We're just mapping the source. This is JSON path stuff, but obviously if you have XML or whatever else, like it would just be slightly different, right? But we're just mapping the source in the JSON to the target, right? And target being the field on the node, in this case, we want it to go to, right? So we want display name in the API to be the title, right? So Robert Allen, your node title, and on down the line, right? So we're just matching up stuff in JSON or XML or whatever to the actual feed, right? This one we've just set to run every day. That's kind of cron based, so that's a loose day. Obviously, all that can be configured with more advanced cron stuff or more advanced triggers, whatever you want to do. But for us, it kind of works. It basically says like, basically every day, go and hit this endpoint and either add new people. You can also set it to remove people that are not there if that's what you want to do. And like force update, all kinds of different options that are basically feed specific that we can go into in detail if anyone's interested. But it's all kind of there. The mapping tab is created by feeds module, so that's all stock feeds module D8 stuff. There's a ton of good tutorials out there on feeds module, and would recommend checking them out if you're interested in that. But the great thing about feeds is that it gives you a lot of this out of the box. Mainly what you're going to have to concern yourself with that if you have a parser that's going to meet up with whatever your endpoint is. But there's a couple different extensions out there as well. So anyway, like if we go to that, we saw mapping. You can add more, but this was our Nvtc for this, right? And there's a couple different plugins and tampers and stuff if you need more complex content, but we'll just keep it simple for now. Let's see. And if we go to the feed itself, sorry. We'll see that, these are all our nodes here. Last time they were imported 1 day, an hour ago. So I'm guessing next time cron runs, it's going to pull more in. But anyway, it's like going in and updating stuff that's existing and adding new nodes if they're not. So pretty straightforward. In an ideal, I think we talked about this briefly, but in an ideal world, yeah, all of your nodes you want to create is going to be a single endpoint, but you're going to have to get tricky if they're not. But that's not specific to feeds. It would be that problem with anything, really. All right. And then once we have all of our local content, right, with the Nvtc fields, then we can basically, at that point, like this page you can make, right? Stock view, all local fields, whatever. Like your overview page, list, filter, whatever, right? Like it's all local content at this point. So the thing we want to do now is basically figure out how we're going to go to the endpoint and get stuff on a full entity view or more advanced view mode view, whatever you want to do, right? So the way we do that is going to be, well, there's several ways to do it, but the way we're going to show you today is we're going to create a custom service to pull the API content. We're going to add a hook preprocess just to the node preprocess, and then to load that data, and then just configure the twig template to display it. So here on the cheat sheet, we've got just kind of a basic white label service, right? So simple service, just uses Guzzle, all the Symfony stuff. You could take this, put in your endpoint, modify a couple things, and it would work for you, right? Super easy. Obviously, with more advanced API endpoints and things like that, you may need to get a little trickier. For this example in particular, we actually had to create like a custom couple things because if it was passing some parameters and things like that. But if we look at it kind of like out in the wild here, it's not much different, right? This is the actual service we're using, which is still Guzzle, right? We're just going to do a construct, get faculty member detail, right? So we're going to pass the ID to the endpoint, basically get data, pass the URL, get the data via Guzzle, decode it, return it, right? So we're basically getting all of this JSON in that call, which is a lot, right? You're talking like 100 plus publications, et cetera, right? So we'll have all this information of a full API view available to us for that view, right? And so once you have your service, the easiest way to do it if you're not going to make a custom controller and do a couple things is just basically add it to a hook preprocess, right? So if we look here, it's an example node preprocess, pretty simple. For desired hybrid bundle, blah blah blah. If mode is full, then get the ID, which is the unique ID we're saving on the node that it correlates to the API, right? Take that ID, go to your service, and get details, right, with that ID. So that's going to pass the ID of whoever to that service. It's going to go get all the info for that person. and then pull down, right? Because then you're setting just a variable my data as full data. So that means this entire JSON return is now available to you in Twig, right, as my data. And we can see that in the wild as well. Theme, it's basically 3 lines. You could actually condense that probably to 2 lines, or even 1, but I just like to write them out so I understand what's happening. So basically for in the pre-process, if the bundle is APL faculty and view mode is full, go and get this stuff, and now it's available to you in Twig, right? So from there, in Twig, we would basically just use it like any other variable, right? So here, you can use it directly, like my data dot field return in JSON, right? And if that field was display name, then it's like my data dot display name is going to give you Robert Allen, right? You can also use it in loops, anything you can use regular stuff for, right? So like loop through stuff. In this example, we're doing that with a few different things. So like, for instance, notable awards in leadership, right? Blah, 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 our markup. And then for award in faculty.professional awards, do this thing for each, right? So now I'm just using it in the Twig template like I would be able to any local content, right? Which, pretty cool. And yeah, I mean, obviously that gets more, it's a pretty simple example, and kind of the sky's the limit, but that's sort of a simple overview of what gets you both like kind of local views and all the benefits of local content here with the ability to add content, organize content, etc., as well as being able to have a more robust like detail view where you're adding a lot more content to it that you're not necessarily tracking in Drupal. So that's kind of the gist of it. And with that, yeah. Happy to answer some questions if you have any.
Yeah, that was really cool. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, no worries.
Give them a couple minutes.
Yeah, sure.
I'm trying to think of scenarios because there's often times where I've done the exact same thing, but honestly, I've not thought about just getting the data when I need it. Like you're like, hey, I've got 100 publications. Do I need to like really sink all that into Drupal? Likely not.
Yeah. Totally.
It's definitely something that you have to have the forethought into, I think. Pretty sticky situations, as I've found. So.
Totally. Yeah. It's all about kind of figuring out if that approach works, but for like an instance like that, then it's kind of like, it makes a lot more sense to not try and sink in all of that content on a rolling basis, but just rather track the minimum that you need and then go get everything else.
Yeah.
Especially if that content is updated a lot, right? Like, so if they're updating it on, that third party, every day or something, you don't want it to try and sync content in 2 different places every time,
Exactly.
So.
Got one.
All
right. No data in the display can be out of sync for up to a day. Yes.
Yeah. In this example, yes. So basically the MVTC, like the minimum viable track content, which is in Drupal, in this example, as we showed, was just run every day. So like, if someone changed their name, it wouldn't show in Drupal until a day later, right? And that's really why you want to go with as little content as possible. In this instance for us, it wasn't really a big deal because about the only thing they would change would be their either their title might change if they got a promotion, in which case like a day isn't really going to matter, or their image, and the same case really. You could get around that by running the import more frequently, but then you're going to run into just all the issues around that. So it's really up to you to decide how often you want to do it. I mean, you could run it every 5 minutes if you wanted to. You just got to come up with something that works for you.
Another question, how is the data managed you pull into the API? Is it in another CMS? And like from the university perspective, why silo things and not merge everything into a single CMS like Drupal?
Sure. So a lot of times where we see in the people example in particular is that it's coming directly from their HR systems. So, that could be anything. Mainly in what we see with people is that they already have something that they're using internally, like via HR or whatever that is, that they don't want to then duplicate. And they're doing more with that than just display it on the website, right? So they're saying, okay, like we're tracking all of the content we have for this faculty member, like their hire date, like what we're paying them, everything. We're just going to give you these things that we want to show on the website and just deal with it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely often the case. I mean, when you're dealing with someone else's stuff, you're going to run into, hey, this is the tool that they're using, and you don't necessarily want them as content authors on the site. So
totally.
Makes sense. Another question, recommended to make sure the page that is doing the API call to be cached? Like what are your caching strategies, and how do you prevent like a performance nightmare?
Sure. So it's an interesting question. So what we like to do is, I think it's in the documentation example here. Oh, wait, maybe it's not. It's not in my example here, but most times we'll cache these requests to the API and tag that. Now, the problem is really that there's several caching issues on core right now, specifically related to anonymous users. So once you start getting onto something like Acquia or Pantheon, when you have Varnish and then like an internal page cache and anonymous users, sometimes it caches it almost indefinitely, right? So the way we get around that really is by turning off, regardless if we're using hybrid content or not, turning off internal page cache usually, because that seems to really be the culprit. Dynamic page cache is fine, we found usually, but internal page cache will basically cache stuff for anonymous users almost forever and not really respect the tags that you're doing. So for now, we've just done that. Combine that with cron runs and cache clears and your whole other caching strategy throughout the site, and it's usually pretty good.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'd be curious to look into that with like what is it, lazy builders or something? I haven't used a ton of those, but have you used those in your render display, like when you're doing the pre-process, maybe putting it through like a lazy builder?
I haven't yet. It's been on the list of things to look at for sure. I think it would work. I just haven't personally done it yet. If that makes sense.
Question: are you putting the site in maintenance mode when you're doing that, or is that just run like in the background, like when you're running the API?
It just runs in the background. You would maybe need to come up with a more complex strategy if you were talking like thousands of nodes or something. In this case, 100 nodes, 4 fields apiece is not going to kill it. So it really depends on the situation. If you're scaling up to hundreds, thousands, lots of complex stuff, maybe you would need to adjust that strategy of when you do it. But for simple stuff, it's usually not been a problem.
Okay. And then onto that, what happens if the service is unavailable? Like, is there any, like, do you have any error handling or something in your service?
Yeah. So right now we've just got it in the service. Like we're essentially just returning null for this simple example. I mean, you could obviously return, hey, the API isn't available, display like no results. There's a lot of different strategies you can use. This one, basically, all we've done is make sure it's not going to crash, if that makes sense. But you can easily also just return null and then check in your Twig template if it's full or not, and display a not found.
Understood. And then another question: would you recommend using another Drupal website as an API hub for other sites?
You certainly can. It doesn't. The nice part about this approach is it's pretty agnostic of wherever it comes from, right? So like, you could build it to go to API, like JSON API or whatever custom stuff you're building on another Drupal site, no problem. You could go to like the Star Wars API. You can go anywhere, really. Like you just need to build your mapping to match. and then the fields on your content, right? So you certainly could. It just sort of depends on what your grander strategy is.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I was gonna say, as soon as I get Drupal involved, I immediately just think of JSON API. I haven't had the opportunity to explore it as much as I'd like, but using Drupal as the single source of truth for something was always been like a goal of mine, especially when they first announced it in 8. I was like, oh, this is great.
Totally.
Because everyone was so like rushing to go headless and rushing to go like the hybrid model.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes sense.
Well, we've found JSON API to be very robust. Sometimes a bit overkill for simple stuff, and sometimes we'll just make a custom REST endpoint, mainly so we can match a lot of times like what comes out of front end. If it's just simple JSON or something, it's like, hey, I'll just like take 30 minutes. I'll just create a custom endpoint and match it exactly, and it'll just work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing we do a lot for some of our bigger education clients is, have Drupal as a content hub, feeding, headless front ends or even other Drupal sites, right? Basically like an external API, but run that through a middleware that you then can normalize content. We do a lot in like GraphQL that way. And that way you can say, okay, give me all the news from the hub over here. Give me all the article, like the people from the hub over here. But also give me like this random stuff from this other thing, right? And you're combining all of those into one like middleware, which gets pretty cool because then you can just normalize the content there. Any like external site just needs to go to the one middleware and has all these different endpoints that go all these different places and stuff. So lots of stuff you can do for sure. Just depends on how robust you need to go.
Yes, definitely. I was gonna say, if there's no more questions, I think I can stop or at least stop the live capture for now. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Looks like one more. Map taxonomy or references from the API.
Yeah,
you can. You certainly can. If you're talking about via feeds specifically, there's a way to import those as taxonomy or to reference as taxonomy based on like the string, right? Because obviously, like whatever external API you're going to is probably not going to have the TID, right, of what's internal to Drupal. But if it matches what the term name is, then you can match it, if that makes sense. So you just need to ensure that if that's a taxonomy reference that's always controlled by the API, that's fine, right? Because you'll just have the API creating them, if that makes sense. And the only thing that needs to match is the name.
As long as that name doesn't change, right?
Yeah. that would be the crux there, yeah. You can also go through something like Feeds Tamper, which is an add-on to Feeds, where you could say, okay, if this is, parse this CSV, and if the term name is Dan, then change it to Daniel, or what, like you can do. You can get tricky with it, but it's just like, how much work are you going to do there,
Yeah, because it sounds like you're like manipulating the data as it comes in prior to you setting it on the MTVC.
Yeah, you're basically going to try and normalize it before it goes into Drupal, if that makes sense. One more here.
The full content service that pulls the not MTVC from the API, that pulls the data directly to the web server, so it's available in Twig. What do you think that are the benefits doing that instead of hitting the API directly from the client browser? So like, why do you hit it from the bat? Like, why do you hit it from Drupal first rather than just getting it from the front end itself?
You can. You can make a JS app or something to do all of that. It just depends on what your strategies are. We like to do it on the back end because it makes everything a little bit more normal for our developers, as well as just goes it all into the caching strategy, right? So like, if you go from the browser, that's fine, but especially think about your endpoints, right? A lot of times these are not like super robust endpoints per se. They're going to handle like thousands of hits, an hour or something, right? It's like, hey, like some university's IT system like has something available, but like don't overtax it, right? So by throwing it on the back end and doing the caching strategy, we eliminate, if you went JS version, then every 100 people went there in an hour, then 100 calls are being made to that API. So you can totally do it. It just depends on what your strategy is.
Yeah, and like John mentioned in the chat, he said, like that content search API that way then too. Like if you needed it stored in Drupal, for various reasons, that's why you would do it that way.
Yeah,
makes sense.
That's a great point.
Another question. Feeds or migrate API? Have you tried migrate?
We have tried migrate, not for this particular functionality. We've used migrate a lot for initially populating content. I think that you could use it for this, but then you basically have to roll, or maybe there's stuff out there, I just don't know. But we've used feeds because it's easier. We use it on D7, like most of our developers were familiar with it. It's an easy UI interface. And more to the point, it's something we can pass on to either other agencies, other developers, other even just advanced users, and they can understand it. The migrate API, if we were to try and enact that, we could probably pass it off to another developer, but like it's going to be harder to troubleshoot because you're kind of rolling your own. So, just depends on if you're more comfortable with migrate, then it would certainly work. Essentially, you just need to get the content in. However you want to do it, doesn't matter necessarily. Awesome.
Lots of cool stuff.
Cool. Well, thanks all. Cheers. It's been a great conference so far, and been happy you guys had me.
Well, thanks again.
Cheers, guys. Talk to you later.